Chapter 12, The Yoga of Devotion. About this chapter. This chapter is about how any person can bring about an unwavering union through devotion to his or her higher consciousness. In this chapter, Arjuna is asking Krishna about the paths of meditation and contemplation compared to the path of devotion for union with the higher self. He wants to know which path is best, as he knows that different paths have been used by different people to reach this goal. Krishna shares his wisdom about this question with Arjuna. The devotional path, he says, is the most direct and most perfect. The contemplative path gets to the same goal but is not as easy. Contemplative or meditative yogis focus on the abstract nature of pure consciousness. Personal devotion to God or higher consciousness is called bhakti in Sanskrit, which depends on and trusts in the grace of the Lord. Jnana Yoga, knowledge-based, also leads to perfection, but depends on the determination of the follower. Krishna's suggestion is to make it easy and follow the path of devotion. He does make it clear that knowledge is better than practice or action, meditation is better than knowledge, and giving up the outcome or fruits of action is better than meditation. This would involve bhakti or love for the higher vision of God. This is a relatively short chapter, but the learning that can come from really understanding the words is worth elaborating upon. Let's first look at the powers that a person contains. There are 3 powers in each person that are elaborated upon in this chapter. There is a power of knowledge, a power of desire, and a power of action. Merely taking an action can achieve a result, but when the action is taken with knowledge, something greater can be achieved. A person can take an action blindly, or he can take an action with a known desire for the action, or he can take action after making plans for the action. Knowledge is not useful alone. It needs action for achieving a result. Otherwise, knowledge remains as merely information or learning. In the world of action, people focus on taking actions first and then understanding why they took the action. This is what we see when people merely react to circumstances they are faced with by thoughtless actions or even inaction. This chapter says that what one is looking for is already within oneself as the higher self. This higher self is present in one's own heart and every other person's heart too. This is why going to church, temples, mosques, schools, or listening to or reading any information is not useful unless one is understanding why one is going. This chapter differentiates between blind faith and conscious faith, and a yoga or union with higher consciousness within each person. Action by itself is seen as ignorant, whether through the body senses, the mind, or the intellect. The nature of the self cannot be realized by an action alone. Turning one's attention through contemplation and meditation to the higher self is more powerful than action. If the mind is not able to focus on the higher self, the suggestions are to purify the mind, to prepare it to turn to the higher self within. This can only be by relating actions taken to the higher consciousness, as in, I'm doing this for God or higher consciousness. Remember that God or higher consciousness needs nothing from a person, but this intention pulls one away from ego attachment to the action. If this is not easy, Krishna suggests that reading or memorizing such information is not sufficient. Many have heard or learned the same information for years, but have still not brought it into a heartfelt expression through the actions of work. And only one knows their own truth of this. Sometimes actions look different than the intentions within. The experience of the lower self, recognizing the higher self within, which brings a continuous flow of one-pointed attention, even while engaged in a worldly life, which is known as dhyanam, is greater than knowledge alone. This is the difference between knowing and being. Remember that this also includes that a person does not take ownership for the work that is happening through their mind, body, and intellect, which produces the action. Meditation may lead to this space or may help one get there if one is able to be absorbed or abiding in the actual experience. In the Gita, we remember that there are 3 energies known as vasanas that are with each person based on the idea of past lives. So a person has likely taken ownership of actions in many past lives, in the present life before this particular time, and in the present day or moment. When one abides in the higher self, one is consciously giving up the ownership of results of all of these vasanas or subtle energies. Now, how does one live a normal life and abide in the higher self? The recommendation is to do one's actions and do not own the result. Do the action as an offering to the Lord or higher consciousness. Do the action to purify one's own mind. Do the action to benefit all. This maintains an internal peace, integrity, and serenity. Remember that one can maintain peace even in the process of action when the mind is able to discipline itself to stay within peace even during each waking moment. This requires a mindful attention to live and experience this truth as the nature of the higher self. This also requires the release from one's likes and dislikes. Since likes and dislikes are also related to personal biases and to one's ego, which seeks to bring things it likes closer and to push things away that it dislikes. Krishna reminds Arjuna again about the different kinds of devotees. There are ones that are working to overcome some physical afflictions, ones that are seeking wealth and fame, ones that are curious to know who God is, and those who want to be as God and have total faith and trust in the existence of God everywhere and in each person or experience. These are the 4 types of people that remember God. This shows Arjuna that all of these different seekers do achieve their desired goals through love and devotion to their own desires. Arjuna is the 4th type of devotee. Krishna lists the characteristics of his ideal devotee. Their characteristics include no hatred towards anyone, friendliness, compassion, one who has no possessiveness, no pride, who is the same in joy and sorrow, who is forgiving. And this is just to remind Arjuna and all readers to keep working towards this ideal through life. Many would find it least easy to have hatred towards no one. Knowledge about this energy helps. When anyone is holding hatred or anger, they are hurting themselves first. It affects one's own physiology. Only when a person is able to see oneness in all can they overcome hatred. Remember that the real is the awareness of the real self, higher self, within all. The wish for all to be happy is useful in this experience, and also realizing that nothing is truly personal from this perspective. The personalization of any experience indicates an ego-based approach rather than the universal oneness of goodwill. The spirit of oneness shares the same love with all while having a true consideration for all beings. This state of being shares the same spirit to all and is friendly to all. Remember that this is a specific detail that Krishna has mentioned from the 2nd chapter itself, that whether a person is a person of action or of knowledge, he or she should keep even-minded in their work. Even activities like eating or sleeping, all should be done with an even mind. This means not too much or too little, to walk the middle path of balance in all without becoming imbalanced through the dualities of life, to accommodate good or bad, victory or failure, happiness or sadness in each moment, and not be pulled into reactions about the judged good or bad of any experience. This includes relationships, which should have not too much attachment and no hatred either. Remember that this does not mean one should not acknowledge and recognize a wrongdoing, but that the wrong action or thought is to be corrected, and the actual person who is thinking or doing such an action is not to be ridiculed or disrespected from the wisdom that each person carries the same higher self. Thoughts and behaviors cannot be forcefully changed, even through corrective measures. So each person needs to walk their own path. Releasing the ownership of the action taken to try to correct actions or behaviors helps a person remain undisturbed from any outcome of the actions taken. To recognize that each person is working through their own past tendencies and experiences that result in their current thoughts and actions brings about an ease in our own actions that are free from judgment. When we can love the wisdom of the higher source, we can maintain our own balance through our own right actions. We are reminded that all major saints and sages have been both ridiculed and appreciated. Each person needs to walk their own path of truth for peace within and around themselves. To learn from examples like sages or saints allows us to also work with an even-mindedness regardless of honor or dishonor from others. Such people will often represent a content contemplation of the higher truths at all times. They are not complaining about the world or even about personal concerns. A contemplative mind is often mostly serene, peaceful, and content. This is the true nature of existence, consciousness, and bliss that the Gita and Vedanta directs people towards, and certainly what Krishna is guiding Arjuna towards. A person who is able to lift themselves from the lower self-thinking is continuously content, whether in company or alone. Such a person may not even have any physical place to stay, but the mind is peacefully stable and steady. This is from an understanding that the physical world is constantly changing, and the only constancy is in the true nature of self-consciousness, which carries both understanding and awareness. Such a mind allows the temporary to be temporary and holds on to the permanent higher consciousness. Such a person sees the permanent presence in what is impermanent and changing. This requires a constancy of the mind which has a full understanding of truth. Such a devotee attracts the energy of the Lord or higher consciousness that helps the person through consistent divine blessings. Through this chapter, we can also understand that legalities can be considered a type of dharma, as laws are about doing what is right or lawful in a particular location. Yet how one behaves with others is dependent upon an unspoken culture which determines moral and ethical behavior, which is also dharma. An even more subtle dharma is represented by the qualities and characteristics shared in this chapter. The non-hatred, friendliness, compassion, no pride, etc. This subtle sensitivity allows one to acknowledge and act from a place that we can recognize as qualities that connect man with his higher consciousness or Lord or God. Arjuna asks in this chapter whether a person who worships a god of form or a formless god is better. Krishna mentions that the best person is the person who has an implicit faith and devotion in his or her heart to the highest self through knowledge and understanding of the truth that leads to correct heartfelt action. The Gita guides us all to act towards the goal of the same source as where we have all come from. Unlike most religions, it's not about punishing people who are less than perfect, but understanding the experience of one's own created karma in life. The Gita encourages right action through right knowledge and right awareness of a union with higher consciousness, which many scriptures define as the ultimate life purpose. The words of the Gita can inspire from our hearts actions that stem from understandable ideas and concepts that can be appreciated by all and experienced with single pointed focus by those that truly seek such divine union. The Gita is clear that every conscious being is living, but only humans have the capacity to question and correct their actions. There is a purpose for our lives which combines an understanding of the vision for life with the idea of freedom from suffering every day. The possibility to reach moksha or liberation and realization is seen as the vision or goal that raises a person above all other conscious beings. The person who understands this truth has a higher vision of life. Moksha or liberation is not a place to reach at another time or in another place. Each person knows that he or she is human and does not need to be reminded by themselves or others of this fact. A liberated soul walking this earth also has no doubt of who or what he or she is. They do not look any different and do not need to be reminded of who or what they are too. The essence of such a person is purity, and he or she has no other preoccupation in life than to unite with higher consciousness. This state of cleanliness or purity includes keeping the external body clean, but also removes impurities or dirt that are or have been accumulated. Like putting a gold ornament into fire brings out the natural brilliance of this pure element. Any offering to the Lord or higher consciousness is seen as an act of purification, an intention to give food, flowers, actions, money. Anything offered to the Lord becomes purified, it is believed, through the intention blessed by the Lord. Some people build schools, some build churches, some take food for offerings at services or events, some light incense. And all of these offerings, when given with the right intention, can be done as devotional offerings too if they carry the energy of love. An act of service, like teaching or healing, can also be seen as an offering with the same loving intentions for the highest good. In this way, a purified or liberated soul moves through the world without likes or dislikes, who is focused on his or herself and also abiding in this space consistently, and such a mind is consistently at peace. This person is an alert expert. This person is an alert expert. He or she has gained a sattvic attitude and clearly neither agitated or restless or lazy or dull. Mindfully and selflessly completes his or her work. He or she is able to complete actions that arise and need to be accomplished with total attention and without distraction. This means doing one's best by being involved in the work to be done, but not becoming disturbed by the outcomes, whether they are as anticipated or not. There is also no judgment or agitation regarding others' participation in the same or similar work. He or she remains untroubled while also engaging in the work to be done. This section is clarifying that one can remain untroubled when they do not participate in the work to be done or while they are participating in the work. Remember that Arjuna's biggest question is this: should he do or not do the participating in this war? Every action may have imperfections or defects in the results seen. The example that is often given is like thinking of fire, which is pure in its essence, yet there is always some smoke. Here, 4 types of karma are mentioned, namely that, number 1, which should not be done, like dishonest behaviors. Number 2, which are done because of a desire, like excessively overcharging for profit, self-centered, greedy, or selfish actions. Number 3, should be done no matter what, daily duties like responsibilities that one has taken on. And number 4, should be done when the time arises, like following laws of the country one lives in or right actions in situations that arise. We must know that number 3 and number 4 are not directly linked to liberation. Correct knowledge alone can lead to liberation. The suggested karmas are meant to be performed without desire or goal. This chapter also mentions that the person who is content and settled in his or her own mind needs to perform the good karmas less and less, as the mind is already living in unity with higher consciousness more easily. When a person begins to take pride even in spiritual progression, this personal pride creates his or her own fall too. Humility and alertness is required at all times. Among the 4 devotees, remember that the best devotee, according to Krishna, is the one who does not take credit for the action taken, as he or she recognizes that transactions are happening with or without attachment to the actions from selfish reasons. The body is the equipment to experience the objects and circumstances that arise. Both are brought about in part by the portion of one's own vasanas coming into one's experience. So sense objects and sense organs create the opportunity. Since a realized or liberated soul is aware of this, he or she does not initiate such an action. This prevents initiating actions and getting caught up or lost in the results of the actions too. The ideal devotee is then said to neither rejoice nor hate, neither grieve nor desire. Most people would feel this seems like a non-joyful existence. Remember that when one achieves happiness, he or she is joyful and may become prideful and eventually corrupt in his or her thinking, losing a pure space to work from. So success may lead to arrogance and eventually wrong thoughts, words, and or actions. A true devotee knows that whatever is accomplished is with the contribution of others, including the grace of God or higher consciousness. When a person experiences hate, the selfish motive is still the same because one's own desire for wanting something or someone to be different also comes from a selfish love that feels not happy because of another's thoughts, words, or actions. Grief is seen as an experience of an awareness that one is unhappy because he or she has lost someone or something. This is also based on the love for oneself, a selfish love, rather than through an understanding of divine wisdom. When one realizes that pride, intellect, body, mind, and ego are being identified as oneself, such thoughts are overcome by understanding the everlasting and pure self, and a liberation from the prior thinking takes place. The pure, higher self does not need any of the conditioned equipment that a person often identifies with. With limited equipment, a person can realize that the unlimited higher self is unlimited in its happiness and bliss. Realized or liberated beings do not look for unlimited experiences from limited tools of the body, mind, intellect, and ego. In this awareness, good and evil are both non-attachments. This only means that a true devotee does not label anything as good or evil, yet he or she still experiences both. This chapter is also to clarify that each good action has some level of bad in it, and each bad action has some level of good in it. If a person is holding a knife over a body, the person may be a murderer or a surgeon. A surgery, though intended for good, may create some pain and or side effects. A murderer may be a police officer killing someone who is out on a rampage of killing many. We are reminded that some amount of smoke is above the purity of fire. Also, good actions may result in good or bad in the moment, and bad actions can result in bad or good in the moment as a result of accumulated karma from each individual participating in an experience. For this reason, it is better to pull away from labeling actions as good or bad. When we look at the sattvic attitude, we can see that this can also lead to possible pride. One needs rajasic, tamasic, and sattvic expressions of the three gunas we have learned about. A devotee is not prideful about his sattvic attributes, nor disappointed or unhappy about the natural rajasic and tamasic attributes, as he or she is aware that they all need to exist for living life. Sattva requires an effort to build, and through appropriate associations and knowledge, one can build this energy. When one is abiding in the higher self, he or she is the observer of the natures of his or her mind and to where he or she directs the action of the body, mind, intellect, and ego. We are reminded that the intellect always wants to conceptualize things. Honor and dishonor, praise and ridicule are the intellectual conceptions. When there is an even response to each of these concepts, one has risen above such intellectualization. In this chapter, we learn from Krishna that an evenness in heat and cold also happens in such an individual. This does not mean that he or she does not notice them. They will respond to the need by increasing the heat in the cold or putting on a fan or air conditioning in the hot weather. Such a person will neither deny the temperature and will adjust if possible, nor will the person demand the luxury of comfort if it is not possible. This is just one more expression of tolerance that can be experienced through the body. To review, in the ideal devotee, in the mind there is an evenness of response to sorrow or joy. In the body there is the same evenness in heat or cold. From the heart there is the same friendliness and kindness to friend or foe. There is no attachment to either side of these dualities. It is only one who can avoid attachment that can be the same even-minded person in every experience. This is what Krishna has shared with Arjuna in this chapter about the true devotee. This is the union achieved through love or devotion, which is what Krishna expresses is the best kind of union with one's higher consciousness. Chapter 12, the Yoga of Devotion for the Healthcare Guru. For this chapter, let's begin with what the healthcare practitioner is devoted to. This could be the accuracy of his or her detailed note-taking and the various actions of care, including, but not limited to, health recommendations, cleaning wounds, sanitizing hands and work area, passive or active exercises with the patient or client, careful listening, acupuncture, massage, adjustments or spinal manipulations or other bodywork practice, bathing, brushing, feeding, cleaning, setting up or adjusting IV therapies, and helping with any activities of daily living. Sometimes the action is just sitting quietly with the client, especially with those in a coma, under anesthetic, or with dying patients. These are all actions, as we know. Now, let's look at more knowledge sharing. The original training that we receive in any healthcare field, and sometimes as a family member learning through another healthcare provider for helping someone in our care, adds with any continuing education that every healthcare provider learns for the sake of their clients and for even maintaining a license to practice professionally. And many do personal work to learn and research the best recommendations for those in their care. This is a knowledge-based action when utilized in helping patients or clients. Some practitioners will write down tips for their clients, and most will verbally try to train them with the knowledge they have learned. This is then a knowledge-based action. Finally, we can look at a love-based action. The longer we work in healthcare, the more likely we are to see clients that are doing all the right things and not improving, and this may bring out a loving compassion. This sort of loving action is not reserved for those who are not improving, as some healthcare professionals or practitioners make it their normal manner with all, no matter what the condition of the client. From this chapter, we can notice that the love-based action, heartfelt, is seen by Krishna as the best. Yet we know that such action also incorporates a knowledge that may be turned into wisdom, and that requires the action too. The key is that such a practitioner be even-minded in all circumstances. So if a patient is doing well, the practitioner is content and pleasant, and if a patient is not doing well, there is the same manner. We learn that this even-minded approach also applies to all events, personalities, good or evil, hot or cold, etc. In a word, dualities. Of course, this then includes the conditions that people work in, the colleagues that they work with, directly or indirectly, and non-attachment to the outcomes of the healthcare provider's action. Healthcare practitioners are affected by the same dualities that the rest of the world is affected by. Many will be found to be worrying or complaining about the traffic, the weather, personal relationships, legal and political concerns. To speak of any of these things is not a concern, but the biases of judgments and the likes or dislikes is very common. If we are to model a healthy perspective to our clients and colleagues, and our own families too, we can choose to be mindful about these tendencies. We were reminded about the gunas that each person carries with them to this life, or to this day, as we can again look at each day as a new life. Or we can think of each soul's subtle energy being carried through different lifetimes. Remember that rajas is a quality that allows a person to actively participate in their thinking, speaking, and action, and usually has an energy of passion to it. This allows one to speak when needed and to act with enthusiasm. The tamas quality can be lazy and quiet on one side to destructive and creating chaos on the other, usually due to a mind's confusion and indecision. A tamasic energy may be useful to raise true concerns in a particular situation to someone who may be able to modify it, like a quiet employee speaking to the boss about safety concerns in the work environment. Or such a person may just avoid getting involved in debates that may arise in a healthcare setting. Finally, the sattvic energy who looks to speak when useful, avoid speaking when not useful, and to stay balanced within the play of these three energies within themselves. Remember that every person has all three. One person trying to be more sattvic may look very different than another in their expression of this in practice. This is because of, again, the acquired vasanas and tendencies that each person has learned from their own life experiences. The love-focused practitioner can care equally for each person's unique life journey, regardless of the interactions from other people. And remember, we are thinking of a divine love quality. Such a loving energy is compassionate, understanding, forgiving, and even-minded. This chapter can allow us all to focus on whether we are giving such care to our clients. These days, it's almost politically incorrect to relate our professional work to divine qualities, and yet that is where we may be losing much benefit for ourselves and our clients. If we truly understand this chapter, we can read the qualities that make a person what many may consider saintly, and indeed they are exactly that. Many healthcare providers are less than saintly, as any of us can easily fall into this space of ego-based reactions rather than higher self-based responses. Sometimes care providers are quite good with such sattvic responses in their practice, and they go home to show more of their rajasic or tamasic tendencies. This is then not the energy of a person truly seeking union with the divine. This is also a conscious awareness that any healthcare provider can benefit from understanding within themselves. Let's look at the non-divine aspects that have found their way into much of healthcare practice. These include greed, lust, jealousy, anger, and pride. We can begin with greed. Most healthcare providers know that just as every other person, when one is receiving money for work done, one may increase the cost of the service provided with the awareness that inflation is also increasing daily. Some do not need to do this as their earnings are more than enough to meet the rising prices, yet many still do. There may be no law that prevents one from doing so, but only one's conscience can truly know one's own reasons. Some may be familiar with this famous quote, "The world has enough for everyone's needs, but not for everyone's greed." That's by Mahatma Gandhi, and most can easily agree with it. Yet, are most understanding their own possibly greedy intentions? We must look within to honestly know this. We may find it unusual to see lust as an area to focus on next. Every year, there are several cases of wrongful behavior from a healthcare provider with a patient. Many times, these are not publicly shared, and private court cases process the information. And like many legal cases, many times a wrongful action does not have sufficient evidence to prove the case. Here, it is also very useful to look within to see if one is looking with any other fantasies in mind with a client. We must remember our trusted roles as healthcare providers and provide consciously an even-minded nature to each patient, even if the patients themselves are initiating lust-based interactions. It should not take legal action for a healthcare provider to understand this, and we must remember that many situations where patients have not been comfortable with looks, words, or actions from their healthcare providers have been held as deep traumas for years. Jealousy can arise in healthcare towards a client or a colleague when they are perceived to be doing better than the healthcare provider feeling less. This is clearly a reaction of the ego and may be undetected by a provider unless he or she consciously reflects on their own thoughts, words, and actions through a process of healthy contemplation. Jealousy can create reactions to people who share the same practice or can create biased care to a patient. Better care or poor care can result with any client, and poor interactions can certainly happen with any colleague from various jealousies. So self-reflection again can help to clear the practitioner's mind and provide ideas for how to change this energy within oneself. Anger is a very common emotion we can see in many people, and healthcare providers are no different. This chapter reminds us that when a person cannot get what they want or like, an anger can arise. The same can happen when someone loses what they want or like. This is why working on ourselves to avoid the duality of likes or dislikes can prevent such an experience. This is not to say that one can't like some things more than other things, but they can stay even-minded, whether they have those things or not, and they do not resort to anger to hold on to something that is not intended for them. Remember that in this chapter, Krishna did tell Arjuna that everything is attainable with single-minded focus, especially when one is keeping in one's heart a consistent connection to one's own higher consciousness. We have all likely heard the phrase, "If it's meant to be, it will be." And this is a good time to remember this. This is not to be said or felt with dejection and sadness, but a confident knowing of this truth. Looking at pride is a humbling experience itself for the healthcare provider. Remember, when we are doing what we know is good work, and others also share this with us, it is a slippery slope to pride. This chapter is to remind us all that whatever we do, it can be looked at with a mindful awareness of the many seen and unseen factors that have helped us and our clients in the process. We can stay centered and non-prideful when receiving praise, not only externally, but most importantly, internally. Pride does not create or help create an even-minded healthcare practitioner, and we have all likely seen or felt such energies within and around us in our healthcare environments. This energy does not help ourselves or even those in our care. In this chapter, we do learn that selfless acts, acts of charity, meditation, offerings to any god or deity, and or loving devotion to whatever one loves most through prayer or meditation are all wonderful ways to connect with the essence of one's pure soul. We learn from this chapter how to give credit to a higher consciousness and to all other beings that are also exactly the same higher consciousness as that which is in ourselves for any achievements experienced. Consciously done, this brings so much value to entire healthcare teams and also to families, other healthcare practitioners, and sometimes complete strangers that have helped the same lives that we are helping with honest and compassionate care. This truly brings a sense of humility and respect back into healthcare practice. Let us remember that this chapter speaks of the ideal devotee, that is demonstrating the yoga, union with the divine, through love and devotion. Let's look at this from the perspective of the ideal healthcare provider. The ideal healthcare provider has a mind that is even tempered in response to sorrow or joy. In his or her body, there is sameness in heat or cold, pretty much meaning that he or she is not complaining about external temperatures felt. In his or her heart, there is the same friendliness and kindness to friend or foe. Such a healthcare provider strives to avoid attachment to either side of these dualities to offer the same even-minded service in every experience, professional or personal. Let us remember that this is considered to be the best kind of union with one's higher consciousness. Our logical minds may think this is not possible. Our spiritual awareness can see that such love is truly for the higher self within ourselves and everyone around us too. This is a love that many compassionate healthcare practitioners do practice unconsciously, some consciously and regularly. We can now all practice this consciously and mindfully from truly living and modeling such an experience.